Hi, I'm Greg Euland with Reynolds & Reynolds, and this is Connected. I'm excited about the conversation today. I get to talk with Frank Toms, who's with Auto Data Direct. But Frank has been around the industry for quite a while, and I'm looking forward to this conversation, especially digging into the topic of synthetic identity fraud. It's something that continues to grow, and we see more and more traction, and it's a pretty slippery slope, and one that we want to make sure that everybody's prepared for and understands pretty deeply. So Frank, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, Frank, I got to ask, and not everybody's going to see this on video. Some will hear it through audio. But behind you on your wall there is about, I can't count them, but probably 20 different license plates from various states all over the place. So what's the story with those?
Sure. We serve dealers all across the country. So, I try to collect the cool ones where I find them. There's some from pop culture there, and some of them are given out as giveaways at our shows that we attend throughout the states. So, always good to bring back home and have a little art for the wall.
Nice. Well, and I assume you've been up to Sandusky, Ohio, because I see the Callahan Auto Parts sign up there above your head, too.
Yeah.
I was just up there last week, actually, like legitimately in Sandusky. So,
okay.
Yeah, I just noticed that. And what a great movie. For anybody that doesn't know, you have to look up Callahan Auto Parts and go from there.
That's right.
Well, Frank, if you don't mind, give me a little background on you, kind of, how'd you get into the industry, and maybe even also for those that don't know, a little background on Auto Data Direct, what the company does, how long you've been around, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. I grew up in the auto industry, to be honest. My father did auto glass for 35 years. So I helped him pull windshields out in South Florida. I was in and out of every dealership, mechanic, and body shop down there. Obviously, that taught me a lot about working with my hands, but it really helped me learn about the people and the jobs they did there, right? So I learned early on that people buy from people. And, if you understand what their pain is and you can help solve that, they're really just looking for a company that can do the job right the first time.
No, that's great. So was that like a franchise, like a Safelite, or did he have just his own?
No, he actually had his own independent glass shop, and we worked on high-end vehicles like Lamborghinis and all kinds of the fun stuff that you'll see down there in South Florida. But, day one was turn that belt to the side. Don't ever let that buckle lean over a fender, So I was a car guy from the beginning. But it's nice to be able to carry on that work here with ADD. ADD's been around since 1999. We're working on 25 years in the automotive industry, providing real-time vehicle record solutions to all kinds of qualified companies that have a use. So we kind of take that core business model of 44 states of direct access, and we can power various other services and feed that information into those.
No, very cool. I can just imagine that conversation with, young Frank. And all right, first of all, don't scratch it. Second of all, don't drop it. This stuff's expensive.
That's right. He said, hey, you're going to college, but you're going to have a backup trade as well. So I don't know if I didn't earn the vote of confidence right off the bat.
Well, Frank, one of the things I wanted to get into, we were talking before we started recording about, being in the middle of trade show season. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit, because it seems like around every corner, every week, there's a million of these different shows that people can attend and go to. So from your perspective, you've been doing this for quite a while. You've seen a lot of different shows. You go to a lot of different shows. You're all over the country, or certainly all over the Southeast. But if I'm a dealer, right, why do I go to a show, and then how do I pick what shows to go to? Because in theory, you could be at a different show every day of every week in the summertime.
There's certainly a lot out there because we play in so many facets of the automotive industry. We're at 212 shows, I think, this year between our team. Pretty crazy. I just came off a pretty heavy a month of travel. Last month, I think I had a week at home. So my wife's happy to have me back. I'm happy to be back and playing catch up. It was a struggle to make this appointment, to be honest, but I didn't want to pass on the opportunity to sit down with you and talk about this stuff because it is very important. Starting out with associations, if you're growing to that level where you're going to be performing as a top level or certified master dealer, you need that education, right? So that's the main thing that the association shows provide. Is educational sessions. There's something for everyone, whether you do in-house financing or you strictly do outside. If you do lease here, pay here. I mean, there's so many different divisions of the auto space, right? They have a section broke out for everyone. Not only that, it's your opportunity to voice your opinion and keep your ear to the ground on what's coming around the corner. If you're just busy every day selling vehicles, you don't know what's coming down the pike. You can get hit over the head with a surprise. So I would
Yeah.
say certainly start with your state associations, but once you grow to that level, you need to get involved nationally. You need to be part of the policy conferences if you have an opportunity to, where you can really voice your opinions and affect some positive change for our industry.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. So how do you, how many's too many do you think if I'm a dealer, right? I got to sell cars. That's my job. That's what I do. That's what I love to do. I can't be out of the store too much. Is it a once a month thing? Is it a once a year thing? Somewhere in the middle? What do you
Yeah,
think?
I don't think it's that often. I think as far as association type shows, you could do a couple a year and get away with it. I think the important thing to think about is incorporating teammates, right? Building up your employees, getting them that education so they can pass the torch and keep a good thing going in that way. So yeah, state association shows are one thing, but training around things like synthetic fraud specifically, our educational seminars are things that they really need to focus on participating in.
Yeah. Yeah. So as this grows, as synthetic fraud kind of grows as a trend, for anybody who hasn't, I don't know, been hopefully impacted by it, but paid attention to it too much yet, can you put a definition on synthetic fraud, specifically synthetic identity theft, and what that means, what it entails? How do you define it?
Sure. It seems like recently the definition is actually broadening. Like I said, I don't claim to be the expert in this field, but what I can tell you is synthetic fraud means that they're taking some pieces of real information, verifiable information, and then they're combining that with synthetically generated information, like completely fictitious information. Some will go as far to actually build up a credit profile by paying bills under this false synthetic identity, build up that credit rating in order to then commit a larger financial crime later down the road. But other definitions are now starting to include just the fraudulent components of the transaction. So if they generate a fake MSO, for example, is one component of the case study that I'd like to share with you here today. That could be considered a component of synthetic fraud as well. And then identity theft is kind of bulked in there, but that's when you're actually stealing someone's real identity and performing the fraud in that way. So that's kind of the distinction.
Got it. Okay, so go ahead and dig in. You mentioned a case study or dealer that you've kind of had the opportunity to talk with about this. What do you? I'm not familiar, so go ahead and dig in. What are you thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, synthetic fraud is certainly a growing problem that we're facing in the industry. Just for some quick stats, 3/4 of dealers have experienced fraud in the past few years, with a staggering 60% of franchise dealers reporting a loss of 3 or more vehicles a year. So those numbers took me back a little bit, but experts are estimating that this type of fraud will amount to a $10 billion loss to the industry by 2025.
So how does that work? So you said, the average franchise dealer losing 3 or more vehicles a year. What does that look like? As I try to put this together in my head, so somebody comes in, they've built up a fake identity, right? A synthetic identity. They buy a car with an identity that isn't real, right? Sure. You basically get the loan.
You're financing,
you get the loan
yeah.
approved through. Yeah, you get the loan approved through a bank. The bank buys the paper. Customer drives off with the car. Customer never makes a payment. And at that point, what happens? Does the bank say, no, we actually don't want this contract? And then the dealer's stuck with the bill for the car? How does the whole transaction work?
Over the last few years, that's what we're starting to see, is that these financial institutions are catching on and they can't take those losses. So they're starting to adapt their language in their contracts to say dealers are going to be responsible for buybacks when these cases of fraud occur, especially in the case that best underwriting practices weren't followed at that time. So
what does that mean, best underwriting practices?
So putting measures in place, right? We want to be checking these data points, as many as we can, to make sure that the individual that we're speaking to is the individual whose documents are presented to us, right? Is the individual who we're ultimately financing, releasing a vehicle to, buying a vehicle from, any of the above.
Yeah. How do you know though? That's part of the struggle is if somebody's built up an entire identity with a credit history, and they've created a, driver's license with their picture on it and they have these documents and yeah, they're fraudulent, but how is an F&I manager expected to know that? How do you do that?
So that really, Greg, is a whole class in itself. And I wouldn't be the best expert to speak to that, but I can tell you that it comes with the training, like we mentioned. And then a few of the services that we provide here at AED can certainly help verify those data points, right? So we do real-time vehicle records. By running the VIN tag or title number, you're able to come back with a real-time record with that DMV's database. Who is the owner? Who is the lien holder? Name and address information. So you're able to compare that to the supporting documents they have, right? As far as the new search that we have available through AMVA, which is your American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, we have a DLDV search we're now offering. So this is a driver's license data verification system. It will actually communicate directly with the state DMVs, OMVs, BMVs, whatever managing jurisdiction they have in that state. And you can put multiple components of the driver's license in and get back true or false results. So typically they're not completing the full license. They'll get just enough information in there to make it past the sniff test. They're not going that far in. So getting as much data and information as you can up front is going to help you better vet these folks, these vehicles, and these deals that you get involved with.
Okay. Yeah. So on these, thinking about the vehicle information specifically, with synthetic fraud, with what we're seeing, with what you're seeing, maybe, is there usually a trade, or are they more so a straight purchase deal that's being they're financing the entire purchase price of the vehicle? That would be my assumption, is there isn't really a trade, but I don't know. What are you seeing?
Yeah, it happens in all kinds of ways that you can imagine. And I'll go over this case study here in just a sec where you can see really how sophisticated some of these hierarchies and schemes were. But they could be as simple as a stolen identity synthetic fraud like we just discussed, where he just goes in and tries to finance a brand new pickup truck, for example.
Sure.
We had a dealer out of Jacksonville. Of course, I can't mention any names, but they had someone come in and hit them with a case of fraud like that, purchased a brand new 1500 Dodge Ram, $70-something thousand out the door, it missed the first payment. But before they missed that first payment, they were at the dealership down the street, trading in that Dodge and buying a Camaro. It was only because those two dealerships used the same financial institution who had happened to put some of these checks and measures in place. They were able to catch it and stop that and arrest that person. But typically what we're coming to find out is the person going in to perform the actual fraud transaction is not usually the person behind the scheme in general.
Yeah. So that was another thing I was curious about is how does a person translate getting a vehicle, acquiring a vehicle by using synthetic fraud. What do they do with that, right? You register that vehicle, you don't make a payment on it, that's going to come back to you as the person that's registered the vehicle. You can't necessarily sell it. You don't have a title for it if you didn't go to register it. Like, there's all these pieces to that puzzle. How do they turn that transaction and that essentially stolen vehicle into cash? The example you gave was, right, immediately they go down, they trade in the vehicle, and they get another vehicle. That vehicle then becomes essentially free, right?
Right. Yeah.
But so that's one way.
Yeah, they're scrubbing the liens and generating completely fictitious titles in this case.
Okay. So, interesting. No, it's
fraudulent documents are being generated. Almost everyone has Photoshop or Adobe now, and they get creative and they, throw as much as they can against the wall and see what sticks, essentially.
Yeah, that is wild. That's wild. So yeah, talk a little bit more about about that customer you were talking about. Was that I don't know how frequently does this really happen? You said dealers are facing this 3 times a year. Is that kind of across the country? Is this more regional? Do you know? Because I don't know. It's wild to think that people go so far.
Yeah, the data wasn't as granular, but we imagine it's mostly your concentration areas, right? Your major cities. But what we're seeing with attacks on actual DMV websites and things like that from cyber and digital fraud attempts is that they will capture all the PII, personally identifiable information that they need to go forward and do these transactions. And once a county or a state starts catching on to that particular scheme, they'll just shut down shop there and go over to the next state or go over to the next major city and try it there. Change up a few things and then try it somewhere else. So it's a cat and mouse game where these officials are constantly trying to adapt and improvise and find new ways to find these people and hold them accountable.
Yeah. Now, is this something, will insurance providers offer protection against this? Like, are there policies you can take out or existing policies that you can add on protection against synthetic fraud or fraud attempts in general?
I haven't heard anything around that, Greg. I may not be the best person to ask on that front, but I would imagine that would be a great thing to look into. One scary thing that I heard recently is these fraudsters are even going to start leveraging AI tools, make it that much harder to trace them and hold them accountable for these things. So yeah, any help that we can get to protect our dealerships, as long as we're checking the boxes we need to, I don't see why they wouldn't offer something along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I don't know how you set the premium though, right? Like, I don't know. That'd be a really difficult one as the insurance provider, but certainly worth looking into. I wasn't sure if you had any insight there. Now, is this something that for you, you're in a lot of stores, obviously, you know a lot of folks in the industry. It doesn't seem from my perspective like this is something that's top of mind for a majority of dealers. And then it happens, and it doesn't happen frequently enough that it's at the forefront. But it happens, and it's a big mess to clean up, and potentially a financial loss. So I don't know. Are you seeing that as well, or are you seeing it creep into the front of people's minds? Obviously, there's been a lot of things in our industry recently, and when something happens, then that thing becomes top of mind. But
Sure.
with synthetic fraud, where do you kind of see this in the hierarchy of priorities for dealers?
Yeah, I agree. As of late, it's of course been in the news again, so it's at the forefront of everyone's mind. But yeah, it's not the main thing that they worry about, right? They have FTC safeguard rules and all other matters of compliance to worry about, as well as selling vehicles every day. So there's just so much involved in navigating the ever-changing landscape of running a dealership in the auto industry these days. But I would say no, unfortunately, it's not one of their major priorities until something really bad happens. Like I mentioned, we've been in this business for 25 years, and a lot of our dealers use us to vet their trade-ins as they come in. They just want to make sure that the person who's selling the vehicle is the owner. Is there an additional owner? What's the relationship? Is it or? It makes for a much cleaner title registration process. It makes for a quicker, more efficient valuation and purchasing decision on that trade. But now we're able to explain, hey, look at all these other factors involved. We can help here as well. So usually we don't get a big franchise account signing up with us until something has happened, right? Hey, I have this issue, or I have this problem. I need to figure out this piece of information. It really helps the title registration team reverse engineer these complicated title registration issues that they deal with.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. But yeah, it's one of those that seems like it's always going to be a surprise because it doesn't happen frequently enough. And when you get surprised, it hurts, it stings.
We try not to be a hard sell and force it on anyone. We just kind of try to present the information and let them make that decision for themselves. But typically our F&I managers, our comptrollers, our title reg folks, they get it right away. They see the value in running these records up front. It stays in the deal jacket once you have the Error Ignite integration. So everyone down the line, when you eventually resell that vehicle, has all the information they need to hit the ground running.
Yeah. Yeah. So thinking about, you mentioned earlier, training classes and sessions that you can go to, whether that's at a conference or otherwise. Are there any resources that are front of mind for you that dealers can look at to incorporate into, especially into their F&I training, right? Our F&I managers are pretty skilled. They're well trained. They're knowledgeable. Is there an opportunity to layer some of this in to training, whether it's for an existing F&I manager or somebody moving into that role, to make sure that guarding against synthetic fraud is something that they're prepared for?
Yeah, there are various classes around this subject available. I don't want to mention any by name because we kind of treat them all like Switzerland. Or neutral. We kind of try to spread the love a little bit. But no, you can do a quick Google search on the subject and find various online classes that will even give your team certifications to say, hey, I have been trained on this and I understand these matters. So we know how to combat them. It'll present different solutions that they can use and tools that they can use, because there are various other service providers that serve different functions and facets of preventing synthetic fraud.
That's a really good perspective on synthetic fraud. Definitely appreciate it. What else is top of mind for you right now? You're in dealers a lot and you're kind of all over the place. You're at a lot of shows. You were mentioning you were all over traveling around the last month. Like, what other topics are top of mind for you? Anything that you want to touch on today?
What I wanted to get to was essentially the gist of the story was that we're seeing an undeniable shift from criminals seeking paper documents to then trying to obtain more electronic records and data. Okay. So that's led to a huge spike in the cyber attacks on dealerships, financial institutions, and the state motor vehicle agencies directly. So these attacks really range in sophistication from like a standalone hacker who has a simple VPN setup all the way up to completely fictitious websites that mirror the state site. And as I mentioned, they're set up to capture that personally identifiable information that the fraudsters can then use and commit further fraudulent crimes down the road. So yeah, I was recently at the AMBA Region 2 conference. We had an opportunity to look at the case study. It was presented by the Louisiana Auto Theft Unit. It was about a group so organized, and they had a hierarchy set up like some of our best sales teams, Greg. They had a ringleader who would source vehicles. He would alter VIN numbers. He would create fake documents to provide for the funding. Under him, he had upper management. Okay, these guys would help source vehicles. They would alter VIN numbers, but they would also train middle management. They'd pass along documents for the sales. Okay. These middle managers would do things like facilitate the sales and recruit runners. These runners oftentimes were people in a bad way, local drug users, sex workers, you name it, people that they would use to run the risk of actually transferring the paperwork at the dealership and take the fall if something happened on spot. And then they go to the DMVs to facilitate transfer of paperwork, fictitious POAs, all manner of things. The interesting part was these managers utilized OBD2 scanners to actually go into the vehicle computer and change the VIN number or make it look like it was a gray market vehicle. Okay. They'd even utilize label creators, and they perform these VIN swaps that were so sophisticated they would pass inspections. He would also go in there and modify the actual MSOs to get a clean title on stolen vehicles, okay, before selling them off again to companies like Carvana and the like. So it's actually estimated now that 51% of fraud cases are now involving MSOs. That's why our franchise guys need to be particularly careful. We do see that after the franchise guys put measures in place, it's going to trickle down to the independent space as well and everyone else in between. So that's something that needs to be on their radar. But there's less paperwork to forge, right? There's less of a trail to cover up with an MSO. And almost everyone, as I said, has a Photoshop or Adobe, right? When that ringleader was finally caught, it was after a red notice had been issued. He was all the way in the Republic of Georgia trying to flee to Russia, 50 pounds lighter than he was in his last arrest. With him, he had that OBD2 scanner device and 8 different stamps that he stole from local notaries around the area that fraud was committed.
Huh.
Ultimately, that case was coined Operation Dirty Deeds. It consisted of 180 stolen vehicles, fraudulently sold, amounting to nearly $10 million in fraud alone. $300,000 in evaded taxes because they would drastically reduce the value of the vehicle before selling it on. And the arrest of 26 individuals connected to the crime, and the top tier members facing racketeering charges. So as a dealership, you can imagine it can do a lot of damage, not only monetarily, obviously, but in damage to their reputations, right? Especially when one of their legitimate customers is looped into this mess. They're eventually selling this stolen vehicle onto a consumer. So that consumer, right. The Louisiana detectives didn't want to take that vehicle away from grandma, but they have to do their job and make everyone right in the end. So their relationships with their finance companies can also be strained. And as I mentioned, there's now putting in practices and language to say, we're going to require you buy back the vehicle if one of these fraud cases occur.
Yeah.
It's a scary matter for the industry.
Yeah, it's wild. It's amazing the lengths that people will go to defraud somebody. It's fascinating the amount of work that people put in, the amount of creativity they'll leverage. It's wild. It's unbelievable, but it's real. This happens, to your point, over and over again across the whole country.
Yeah, if we weren't laughing, we'd be crying, but we have to joke about it at the end of the day and say, man, if they invested half this energy and creativity into something legitimate, imagine how successful they could be.
Yep, it's wild. Well, Frank, I definitely appreciate you taking the time. It was a good conversation. I'm glad we were able to make time for it. I know you've been out and running around quite a bit, so this is probably tough to squeeze in, but I really do appreciate it.
Absolutely. Hey, I'm easy to get a hold of even when I'm running around, but I also have a great team of co-managers. If anyone's interested in speaking with us, please reach out. We'll be happy to help.
Sounds great. All right. Well, Frank Toms, thanks so much for joining, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
Thank you, Greg. Take care, buddy.
All right. See ya. Well, a big thank you to Frank Toms from Auto Data Direct. Appreciate him hopping on. Not a commonly discussed topic, but certainly an important one. So I'm glad he was able to bring it to the forefront and shed some light. Before we hop off, don't forget you can watch or listen to all episodes of Connected on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify podcasts. And make sure to hit subscribe so you're notified every other week when new episodes are released. Thanks so much, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.